SABC, host broadcaster of the G20 South Africa 2025.
South Africa received global support after taking over the G20 Presidency almost a year ago. According to the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Ronald Lamola, 42 countries are confirmed for participation at various levels at this weekend's G20 Leaders Summit. Now, this includes 20 G20 members, excluding the United States, 16 guest countries, and 6 countries representing regional economic communities in Africa, the Caribbean, and East Asia. Among the topics on the agenda for the summit are the G20's contribution to disaster risk reduction, climate change, just energy transitions, and food systems. Well, to talk more about this, let's cross over back to SABC News US correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease. Sherwin, nice to see you there at Nasrec, as you explained it in your last crossing, pretty much so the headquarters of the G20. Let's talk a little bit about how the global community has received the news of the US President Donald Trump's threats that his administration is boycotting this weekend's G20 Leaders Summit, and the news that they also are demanding that absolutely nothing is adopted without their inclusion.
So the United States has certainly presented a spanner in the works for South Africa's G20 presidency, Leanne, not just because of disagreements over the agenda and the theme for this year's G20 presidency, but also due to the bilateral disagreements between South Africa. Things related to South Africa taking Israel to the International Court of Justice, alleging a genocide in Gaza, issues of South Africa's bilateral military cooperation with countries like Russia and China and Iran, and various other elements that have sought to impugn the relationship, certainly since South Africa arose or ascended to the G20 presidency. So the question was, how has the world reacted? And I think very soon after Donald Trump, the President of the United States, instituted and issued that executive order in February denouncing the South African government, treatment of white Afrikaners, and creating that refugee program, who were among the first leaders to come to South Africa? I remember they met in Cape Town soon after that announcement in the US, and it was none other than Ursula von der Leyen and President Costa of the EU, the European Council, right, signing various energy-related agreements with the South African president in Cape Town. And I think that demonstrated the support that South Africa enjoyed despite its relationship with the United States. Why? Because there are a lot of those countries, the EU bloc, Canada is a member of the G20, South Korea is a member of the G20, Turkey is a member of the G20, and various other countries, Mexico, Brazil, have all had fraught relationships with the United States based on President Trump's issuing of those reciprocal tariffs. So I think what you're going to see is a collective of countries here, including the invited guests that we mentioned earlier, really coalesce around this theme, really coalesce around issues of equality, solidarity, and sustainability, issues related to the broader development agenda that all member states in 2015 at the United Nations signed on, which is essentially the 2030 agenda and the SDGs. And what South Africa, following on from Brazil, following on from India and Indonesia before that, countries of the global south have really sought to assert the development agenda because the SDGs are lacking, implementation is lacking, and their argument is we cannot just focus on macroeconomic stability, we have to deal with issues of development, issues like climate justice, disaster resilience, innovation, infrastructure, trade, the supply chains and the beneficiation around critical minerals. And you'll see a coalescing around that, whether the United States is in the room or not. And you heard the posture, in a sense, shift with Ronald Lamola when he was discussing, previewing the week with Bloomberg earlier this week. And he said, the world needs to recognize how it needs to move on with or without the United States. And I think that's what you're going to see with member states that are going to join President Cyril Ramaphosa over the next few days.
Very interesting show, and it truly is one of those moments where the script is writing itself every minute of the day. And it'll also be interesting as well to see how business leaders, but particularly American business leaders, are handling this situation. Because, when politically things are not looking well, how does it look for the business fraternity? So these are some of the issues we'll be discussing, as well as a lot more. Sherwin Bryce-Pease, SABC US correspondent. He's at Nasrec, and he's just giving us an update on the latest news coming out of the G20.